Hi everyone, it's Raina. So, about a year ago, and this would be in 2020, I did a series on the natal moons in the various houses, and I guess I forgot the eighth house. I don't know how I could possibly forget the eighth house, but I did. And somebody pointed out to me, and I couldn't believe it. And then I looked on my own channel and found that out. So, here I am recording in 2021, a year later, and I'm glad to do so because it looks like this is the only one that I forgot. And the other thing I wanted to say along with this is that it's really fascinating to look at the different positions of the moon in various houses, but also to look at what sign the moon is in, because I think one of the things I got confused about is that I have done a moon in Scorpio video, and this is going to be very similar to that. But the difference is that the moon can be in any sign in that eighth house. So that is what is giving a slightly different interpretation. Although I'm going to be interpreting it very similar to the moon in Scorpio. But if we look at the actual sign that the moon is in, that will give a slight variation. So the eighth house is Scorpio's house in the universal chart, so it rules the area that is all about death, and the larger theme is transformation. Death is a part of transformation. It's the ultimate transformation, really. But the eighth house is a house of shared resources. It's the house of the occult, which means hidden, and definitely the eighth house is about hidden matters. It's about taboos, what lies beneath the surface, the shadow self. And so, suffice it to say that when your moon is in the eighth house, a lot of those challenging emotions that nobody wants to admit that they have can show up in this area. So, intense feelings. Now, happiness, or well, happiness isn't a good example because I don't think there's a happy emotion. Yeah, we have happiness, but just joviality, or being playful or positive, these types of emotional responses are not what we're talking about in the eighth house. Those might be more of the ninth house, because that's Sagittarius's house, and that's Jupiter's house, and Jove is Jupiter. So there you go. But the eighth house, Scorpio, and Scorpio's rulers are Pluto and Mars, and we look at what Pluto represents, the Lord of the underworld. Mars, the god of war. So these two, the combative energy, the fighter in life, and life and death, in the eighth house is going to be life and death. And Pluto is this, kind of the dark side, the criminal mind, or the criminal network, or the seedy underbelly, that kind of thing, and power plays, and those kinds of issues that can come up with the eighth house. But if I talk about, if somebody has the moon in Gemini or Libra, this can be good, but also really maddening for the person and upsetting for the person at times, because I'll take the moon in Libra. Both of those are air signs, by the way. And so air signs like to stay above the fray emotionally. They don't want to get into even something that is very, very emotional in a sentimental way. I don't think that a lot of air signs would enjoy that. Air signs want to operate in the intellectual realm, not in the emotional realm. Even though Libra is a romantic sign, it's almost like the concepts of romance versus the nitty-gritty of those, like deeply dramatic scenes in some kind of schmaltzy love story or something like that. No, that's not what Libra even wants. So the eighth house is very intense in the emotional nature. And this can create discomfort for somebody with the moon in Libra because they may feel ashamed of those emotions being stirred up within themselves. Okay. And so, this is similar to when I have a client who has a sun sign in Gemini and a moon sign in Scorpio or something like that. They oftentimes, well, I'm just assuming on my end of things that they have a hard time reconciling both parts of their nature. And so something has to be kind of disowned, if you will, and it's going to be that moon in Scorpio, or in this case, having the moon in the eighth house. If the person is a sun sign, that is air, especially maybe earth, but especially air, I think, out of all the four elements, they may feel like there's something wrong with me. Why do I get triggered emotionally? And it might be under certain circumstances, especially in romantic relationships or those significant other type of relationships where their vulnerability, or actually I should say your vulnerability, really becomes the real deal. So in other words, somebody can be pretty detached when they are dealing with friendships, when they're just hanging out with their girlfriends or their guy friends. And then they are dealing with a potential love partner or an actual love partner, and all of a sudden they have a lot of anxiety because it's hard for them to get close, but they want it more than anything in the world. That is the paradox of this position, is that you may be somebody who you are I was going to say, an extreme type of emotional nature. You have an extreme emotional nature. So you may really want that kind of bonding with somebody at a deep level, but by the same token, you can be totally fearful that you're going to be somehow betrayed emotionally, that you're going to have your heart broken, and so you may withhold. There's a secretive quality with Scorpio and with planets in the eighth house. Like I have the sun in the eighth house, and my sun is in Sagittarius, and I have always thought of myself as an open book. And then when I was doing the video for the sun in the eighth house, I started, just totally laughing, thinking about how absurd it was that I actually think I'm an open book when I don't even show my face on YouTube, and it's been 5 years. And it's almost like this irrational paranoia about, oh my gosh, what if I don't want to be exposed to the world? And I'm making a big deal out of it. But that's just my natural inclination to do that. And that's the sun. That's how I am shining my light. There's an obscurity there. With the moon, the obscurity is on the emotional level. This is a water house. So the emotions are a big part of the three water houses, the fourth, eighth, and 12th houses. And the other thing, too, about this, now they did not put it this way, but I would call it ancestral karma. The dark family secrets and shame of your lineage can be here. Now, I thought I read somewhere that that was the fourth house, because the fourth house is your family of origin. But I should just accept the fact that there's a lot of contradiction with some of these. And, the eighth house is the house of secrets, the house of taboos. And so one thing, they didn't say it, but I'm going to go there. I'm going to say sexual abuse. If this is something that, you had, especially I would say with the mother side of the with your mother, maybe that's something that also happened to her if it happened to you. And they did not speak specifically of that. They're talking about other things, but I think that is such a big one that I wanted to bring that up. And I have read, I believe I read so much that I can't remember, but that shame was the part of the eighth house because of these difficult emotions and because of the trauma that the person may have experienced. The eighth house is the house of trauma. And so this is going to be on the emotional level. So one thing that I didn't see in the source that I read, and I want to give a shout out now to astrologyk.com. I think that was the name of it. Yeah. I really recommend it if you're looking for these sorts of, if you're researching this sort of thing, because I find them to be quite thorough in their discussion. But I kind of skim things just to get a feel for it and make my list. And one thing I didn't notice is them hone in on death. So I want to, because the eighth house can be the house of death and literal death. And if somebody, like if you experience the death of somebody important, or maybe it was multiple deaths of, relatives, or, friends, even like if you were a child and you had a best friend who died, of a disease, or an accident, these kinds of things can leave an indelible mark. Now, obviously, there are going to be children who don't have the moon in the eighth house who are going to experience death. The difference is that you have an emotional response in reaction to the death or deaths that can shape your whole life. And that can be for the better or or in your detriment. It depends on other factors. Now, you may have experienced some kind of emotional deprivation or betrayal or something like that, and that can create those trust issues, that bitterness, that lack of forgiveness. Now, they didn't mention that, but I'm bringing that into it because that's also something that Scorpio can suffer from. And one of the things that I think goes on when it comes to lack of forgiveness, what is going on is that the person is erroneously thinking that if they don't forgive the person who trespassed against them, that they are somehow empowering themselves. I remember, and I think I was dealing with somebody. Yeah, this is kind of funny because I had an experience with somebody, not my relative, but my partner's relative, who has the moon in the eighth house. No, she doesn't have the moon in the eighth house. She has the moon in Scorpio, but similar deal. And I think I apologized to her for something that I had done, even though it wasn't like some horrendous issue. But I did say, oh, okay, I'm sorry about that. And it was like uh, she, it was like she saw some kind of vulnerability and she doubled down. And these are the kinds of things that happen when people feel powerless. So you may feel like, and I'm not saying that you would do this, but what I am saying is that the ability to see other people as um, mere mortals who may betray you, do things that you don't want them to do, and yet still not have this sense of bitterness against them to the point where, you don't even want to hear their name, or vengefulness, I think, can be a big issue with the moon in Scorpio, as well as having your natal moon in the eighth house. And maybe even, especially with the moon in Scorpio or the moon in Libra, which is the sign that is all about justice. And although Libra as a sign itself would never cheer on, I don't think Libra would be like that, of like, I want to see them get theirs. There is a karmic aspect to Scorpio, or you could say this particular house. In the tarot, the Judgment card is connected to Pluto, and that can be like cause and effect. And so I could see the average Scorpio person, and even though you are not necessarily a Scorpio having this moon position, and I was going to say, and God help you if you are a Sun in Scorpio and natal moon in the eighth house. Just joking, kind of, sort of. You might still be somebody who understands what I mean, even if you don't have that. That there's that sense of wanting that person to get their just desserts. And you may feel like it's only fair, or you might even use God to justify it and say, an eye for an eye, or whatever. That's Old Testament, isn't it? Just something that makes you feel like, hey, I have the right to think like this. But if you really analyze it, it can be because you felt hurt and you want them to feel the way that you did. And while there's a grain of truth in all of that, the higher vibration is one of understanding why people do what they do. One thing I put down here is the dark underbelly of emotions may present as the pain, or I'm sorry, may be present as the pain body, and is heavy, rageful, yet also aware of this side of life. And what I meant by that, because I always try to paraphrase, I'm not just reading what they're saying. But the dark underbelly, like I was talking about, of emotions, which are those emotions which are the person may be ashamed that they even have rage inside of themselves, like the moon in Libra, or even like the moon in Virgo, which may want to be very rational and somebody who is very useful and not, some kind of harpy or anything like that. This can create a deeper sort of feeling nature, especially with the more negative or challenging emotions. The emotions may be heavy because of that pain body. And that was a term that I heard Eckhart Tolle use, but I think it's Buddhist. And yet also aware of the side of life, meaning that the person can be a very good, I think can be a very good healer because like a psychotherapist, and this is the house that's associated with psychotherapy, and it can be very good because the person feels, or the person is able to understand what other people have been through, and they're not like freaked out by it because they probably have been through the fire themselves. You can be a catalyst for the transformation in other people, if you choose to be. But if that were the case, you would have to really get in touch with that shadow, because the potential for projection is great if the shadow is going largely untouched or unexamined. And I think most of us have experience with people whose shadow is unexplored. And this comes in the form of projection a lot of times, where a person, and also people who are hair trigger, in terms of like, if you've ever been around somebody who you start talking to them and they may be a stranger or they may be a coworker or something like that, and you're talking to them and it seems like you're always constantly offending them. And you're very innocent in what you're saying. You're not trying to, but they just read into everything. It can be because they are feeling low self-esteem, but they don't know it's coming from another source. So they're kind of projecting onto you this crime that you didn't commit, and yet they don't admit to themselves that they are having problems accepting themselves. And so if you have ever done that to anyone else, that's a sign for you to learn how to heal, so that you can be much less reactive, but also that you understand why you're reacting. It's not enough not to react, because it could be like sitting on your hands where you still have those triggers. You're just not, you're biting your tongue, but that's not necessarily a healing thing. Getting it out, getting it just out of yourself can be, the best way to, it's like an exorcism in a way. So, if you're, the moon and or if the moon is, what am I saying? I was acting like there was an angle here. If the moon is afflicted, in other words, if it has hard angles to other planets, and I would say it would have to be more than one. If it just has several, then if you break up with a person, there can be, it's like the war, it could be like the War of the Roses, where you're having some kind of power plays going on. And of course, money is the one area that narcissists love to play the playground, where they love to, go around town and play games, one up their ex in some way. And that obviously isn't a very good situation to participate in or to be caught in. So because this is the area of shared resources, this can be, the War of the Roses, if you remember that movie. And by the way, I remember seeing that movie and I didn't really find it funny because it just seems so horrible, but when people, who really are into like the whole power trip with money, see something like that, they can find humor in it because to them, it's so important to have that. And these two characters were like that, and they were willing to, make themselves unhappy. I don't remember, it was so long ago, but it just seemed like a horrible thing to do. So, looking at, your relationship with money as it pertains to another person, are there power plays? Like if you are married, for instance, do you and your spouse fight about money, how to spend it, how to save it, and things like that? Or have you been divorced and money became like this big deal that made the divorce drag on and on? If you're, and I hope I said I think I said you're a catalyst for transformation in other people. If you find that you crave various sexual partners, because the eighth house can be the house of sex, although it's going to be more of the serious variety than the fifth house, which can be flings, affairs. The eighth house is more of that intense kind of experience, but still it is a house of sex, and intimacy is can be emotional too. But if you find, because the moon can indicate fluctuation or change, and so it can show like there's a lot of change in that area, and if you feel like you want to have different sexual partners, it can be a sign of being emotionally insecure. And you see that sometimes with people, and this can be men and women, who constantly change their sexual partner. And other people can look at that and say, oh yeah, that person's trying to boost their self-esteem. They want to be desirable because that boosts their self-esteem. But really, it could be an emotional need that is trying to get met. And of course, it doesn't get met that way because they're fluctuating so much. But you can be very loyal. So it's important to note that. And you can love very deeply. You don't have to be fickle. I think that if the moon, and you'd have to look at Mars, you'd have to look at different things, but if it's in, if your moon sign is in like Aries or Leo or something like that, that can exacerbate it because those are pretty lusty signs. Taurus, that kind of thing. Speaking of which, Taurus is the opposite sign of Scorpio. And because this is Scorpio's house, the moon position here can indicate that you might struggle with jealousy and you might be possessive like Taurus can be. And, this can create problems in your emotional relationships because people, by and large, maybe not every person, do not like their partner to be jealous because it can lead to controlling behaviors. It can just lead to ugly scenes and that kind of thing. And the person may feel like they're not free. And that kind of thing can really bother, especially the fire and the air signs. They, in particular, are signs, because they're masculine signs, they tend to be a lot more extroverted, and the water houses are, connected to, the water signs are introverted. So they're very personal, and they are not necessarily, that when you think of somebody who doesn't trust others, it's like they may trust their inner circle, but they don't trust outsiders, So that kind of individual is going to be wanting their partner to be only with them. Why do you need those other people? Why do you need to make new friends? Why aren't I enough? And these are legitimate conflicts. in some cases, depending on the other party, that person may be very commitment phobic, and they may use their social life as a way to escape intimacy. And in those types of situations, if you find yourself with somebody like that, first of all, make sure that you are being vulnerable enough that you can demonstrate your own willingness to let down your guard before you demand somebody else lets down theirs. But if you are doing that and you still have that sense of resistance from the other party, then you need to find somebody who has more of a desire for that level of intimacy, connection. And then you will be vibing from the same place. So anyway, wow, that felt really heavy, because it's powerful though. You can be a very psychic person. Whenever somebody has, because the moon is an intuitive influence, and the eighth house is a water house, so that gives a double effect. And I would even say that, even though I didn't see it from that website, that you might even have the ability to channel, and that would put you in communication with people who have crossed over, where you could give messages to loved ones who are grieving the loss of their dearly departed. And you can help to reassure them that there is life after death. Or other types of mediumship and whatever that involves. If you think about Esther Hicks, the kind of thing that she does, that's kind of where I'm going with that. The ability to kind of tap into entities who have crossed over. And, go into a trance, go into a spell. But, when you have the moon in the eighth house, and I think this would be true, just like if you have Neptune here, to be very careful about your psychic boundaries, because the moon is very influenced. It's very impressionable. Water is very impressionable. And so you don't want to just open yourself up as a channel to any and everything. And also in terms of drugs, alcohol, that you might have a very low tolerance for these things, and to be aware of that. So in any case, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you would like to explore your natal chart with me, I love to do that. That's like my favorite thing of all. And I have different types of astrological readings. I also do the tarot. The link below will take you to a page which will give you all the descriptions of the types of readings I offer. Thank you for listening. Take care. Bye.